It was a rainy Tuesday evening when she arrived at the restaurant for her shift, the sound of raindrops tapping against the window as she walked in. The familiar scent of freshly prepared food and the hum of quiet conversations greeted her. But today, there was something different in the air. The usual energy of the restaurant was a little more electric, a little more alive. Maybe it was because the place was packed, or perhaps it was the buzz of excitement from a big event happening that night. Either way, she couldn't help but feel a little more awake than usual. She clocked in, grabbed her apron, and went to the back to start prepping for the evening. The staff was busy, moving between the kitchen and the dining area, making sure everything ran smoothly. As usual, her job was to take orders, serve food, and ensure that every customer had what they needed. It was routine, nothing more, nothing less. But tonight, something was different. It wasn't just the energy of the restaurant or the fact that it was busier than usual. It was the guests. The restaurant had become known for attracting high-profile customers, but tonight, the room was filled with the kind of people who could afford anything they wanted. The kind of people who would never notice someone like her. Her job, as always, was to stay invisible. She was good at that. She moved quietly between the tables, keeping her head down, making sure no one felt neglected. It was easier that way. The guests were there to enjoy their evening, and she was there to serve them, nothing more. Still, she couldn't help but notice the looks some of the guests were giving her. A glance here, a subtle nod there. She wasn't sure what it was about tonight, but it felt like everyone was paying more attention than usual. At the end of the night, after the last plate was cleared and the last drink served, the staff gathered in the back to discuss the event. The manager, a serious woman who never smiled, briefed them on the next few hours. There was something special happening later in the evening, a private event. The restaurant had been booked for a corporate celebration, and the VIP guests were due to arrive in the next hour. "All right, team, listen up," the manager said, her tone sharp. "There's going to be a lot of important people tonight. Keep your eyes on the details, and remember, we're not just serving food, we're serving an experience. Make sure everything is perfect." "Understood?" The staff nodded, some of them looking excited, others just nodding along. She stood there quietly, listening, her mind drifting to the piano that stood in the corner of the room. It had been there since she started working at the restaurant, an elegant grand piano that looked as if it belonged in a concert hall, not in a dining area. It had always caught her eye, and on nights when things slowed down, she would occasionally find herself standing by it, running her fingers across the smooth keys, imagining what it would be like to play for an audience. But tonight she wasn't sure if it was the piano or the fact that she felt out of place in this world of fancy suits and expensive drinks that made her restless. As the clock ticked closer to the event, she returned to the dining area to make sure everything was in place. The lights were dimmed, the waitstaff adjusted their uniforms, and the sound of classical music filled the air. The guests began to arrive, their laughter and conversations growing louder as they took their seats. She moved between the tables, taking orders and refilling glasses, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. But every now and then, her eyes would wander back to the piano in the corner. She had always loved playing the piano, even though she'd never had the opportunity to perform in front of others. It was a talent she kept hidden, something just for herself. It was easier that way. The evening passed without incident, the usual hustle and bustle of the restaurant keeping her busy. As the guests ate and chatted, she found herself caught up in the rhythm of the night, moving from one table to the next, making sure no one had to wait too long for their drinks. But still, the piano tugged at her attention. There was something about it, something that made her feel like she didn't belong in this world of fine dining and well-dressed guests. The piano was a reminder of something she'd always wanted but never thought she could have, a chance to share her music with others. When the event was nearly over, the guests began to wind down, and the mood in the room shifted. It wasn't the loud chatter or the clinking of silverware that filled the air anymore. It was a quiet buzz, an anticipation of something to come. The host of the private event stood up, raising his glass to the guests, signaling that the night's entertainment was about to begin. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've enjoyed having you here, and as a special treat, we've arranged a little something for you. We're lucky enough to have a talented musician with us tonight. Let's give her a warm welcome." She froze in place, her heart leaping into her throat. A musician? What was going on? The crowd turned toward the back of the room where the piano sat. She felt a mix of excitement and dread rise within her. What was happening? Who was going to play? Her hand suddenly felt clammy as she stood there, unsure of what to do. Then the host smiled, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Ah, there she is," he said. "We're lucky enough to have one of our own join us tonight. I'm sure you've all noticed the grand piano in the corner. Well, it's time to see it put to good use." The guests murmured with interest, clearly excited by the unexpected announcement. She glanced nervously at the piano, her heart pounding. She didn't understand. Why was he looking at her? And then it hit her. He wasn't looking at anyone else. He was looking at her. Her breath caught in her chest as the host walked over to her, a grin on his face. "Why don't you give us a song?" he said, his voice friendly but firm. "We'd love to hear what you can do." Her mind raced. Could she? Could she really do this? She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't a performer. She was just a waitress. But the pressure in the room was building, and there was no turning back now. All eyes were on her, and she felt her feet move toward the piano as if on their own accord. Every part of her wanted to turn and run. The familiar feeling of fear gripped her, but something else stirred inside her, a quiet voice telling her to take the chance to do something different. She had spent so many years hiding in the shadows, playing only when no one was watching. What if, just for once, she stepped out into the light? Her fingers brushed the keys as she sat down at the piano. The cool touch of the ivory keys was comforting, but her hands were trembling. She took a deep breath, her heart racing as the silence stretched on. The guests waited in anticipation, their eyes trained on her, waiting for her to start. The room was so quiet now, the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. She could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on her, and for a moment all she could do was stare at the piano. But then, she closed her eyes for a second, took another deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, hesitant, but as she continued, the music started to flow. The familiar melody soothed her nerves, and the tremor in her fingers began to fade. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, lost in the music, and for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. The night continued at the restaurant with an air of excitement hanging over the room. The guests were laughing, enjoying their meals and talking about everything from business to the latest trends. The staff moved quietly between the tables, ensuring everyone had what they needed. But for the waitress, it felt like any other evening, until the moment the host stood up and announced something unexpected. The restaurant had a tradition of offering entertainment during special events, and tonight it was no different. The host, a sharp-dressed man in his late 50s, stood up with a glass of wine in hand and made his announcement with a smile. "All right, everyone, it's time for something a little more exciting," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "We have a grand piano in the corner, and I think it's time we had a little entertainment. If anyone here can play, now's the time to show us what you've got." The guests chuckled. Most of them were here to celebrate a successful business deal, and they weren't expecting anything serious. The thought of someone from the staff stepping up to perform seemed almost laughable. But then, as the room settled into a quiet buzz of curiosity, the host continued. "Come on, don't be shy. There's no pressure. Anyone who plays even a little will get a round of applause." His voice was lighthearted, but the underlying challenge was clear. It was a test. The room fell silent as people glanced around. The staff moved quietly behind the scenes, continuing to serve drinks in clear plates, avoiding the sudden shift in attention. No one moved toward the piano. The waitress, standing near the back of the room, overheard the conversation. She had been serving drinks to a table of well-dressed guests when the announcement was made. She wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, but as she watched the host joke about the piano performance, a tiny thought flickered in her mind. Could I do it? It was a fleeting thought, one that she quickly brushed away. After all, she wasn't a professional pianist. She had only played for herself, for the love of music, never in front of an audience. Not once had she imagined herself stepping out of her role as a waitress and showing off this hidden talent. She had been playing piano for as long as she could remember. Her grandmother had taught her when she was young, and it became her escape. The sound of the keys, the way the music flowed through her fingers, it brought her peace in the chaos of life. But it was always a personal thing. Music was just for her, something she did in her spare time when the noise of the world became too much. Yet, As she listened to the host's playful challenge, her fingers itched. The idea of playing just for a moment was tempting, but she quickly dismissed it. What if she messed up? What if she didn't play well enough? The thought of embarrassing herself in front of a room full of wealthy, influential people made her stomach turn. Still, she couldn't help but glance over at the piano. It looked so inviting, almost like it was calling to her. The black and white keys sat there untouched, just waiting for someone to press them and create something beautiful. She had played in front of people before, but never in such an extravagant setting. The piano was positioned so everyone could see it, and the idea of performing in front of such an important crowd made her hesitate. The room buzzed with conversation, but a part of her stayed focused on the piano. She could hear the laughter of the guests and the occasional clink of glasses, but the longer she stood there, the more the idea gnawed at her. She had played many times before in private for herself and at home for her family. But this would be different. It was no longer just her private escape. It was a challenge. It was stepping out of her comfort zone. As the host continued to encourage the guests, a voice inside her pushed her forward. "What do you have to lose?" she asked herself. It wasn't like anyone would expect a flawless performance. Most people probably wouldn't even take it seriously. But what if, just for a moment, she could do something amazing? What if her music could captivate them? She didn't know what made her do it, but before she could second-guess herself, she started walking toward the piano. Her heart raced with each step. She could hear the soft murmurs of surprise from the crowd, but she kept her head down, focusing on the keys ahead of her. When she reached the piano, she took a deep breath. The room felt unusually quiet, and the guests had started to turn their attention toward her. Her palms were sweating, and her fingers trembled slightly as she rested them on the piano keys. For a moment she just sat there still. The challenge, the pressure, it all seemed to hang in the air. The host, who had been watching her approach, gave her a reassuring smile. "You've got this," he said, his voice gentle but encouraging. She nodded, unsure of whether she believed him, but something inside her urged her to start. So she did. She placed her fingers on the keys and began playing the first few notes of a song she had loved for years, a piece that was familiar, soothing, and easy for her to play. It was a song she had always turned to when she wanted to relax or escape the stress of her daily life. The sound of the piano filled the room softly at first, a gentle ripple of music that seemed to invite the guests to listen. At first, no one moved, unsure of what to expect. But as the melody grew, something changed. The guests, who had been talking and laughing just moments before, slowly fell silent. The sound of the piano seemed to wrap around them, drawing them in, making them forget about the conversations they had been having. It was like a switch had flipped. What began as a hesitant, unsure tune began to flow more naturally as she became lost in the music. Her fingers moved more confidently now, finding their place on the keys without thinking. She wasn't just playing anymore. She was expressing herself through the music. She wasn't the waitress who had been serving drinks moments ago. She was a musician, lost in the rhythm of the song. The guests in the room were no longer just listening. They were watching. The mood had shifted. There was a sense of awe in the air, and the energy of the room had changed. No longer focused on the business deal or the cocktails in their hands, everyone was paying attention to the young woman at the piano. As the last notes of the song faded, the room stayed silent for a moment. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. For a few seconds, it felt like the world had stopped. And then, as if someone had pressed play on the scene, the room erupted into applause. She hadn't expected it, hadn't even thought that anyone would clap. But there they were, all of them, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. The sound of their applause made her feel both overwhelmed and incredibly proud. She had done it. She had stepped out of her comfort zone and performed in front of a crowd of strangers, and they had appreciated it. The host walked over, a broad smile on his face. "That was incredible," he said. "You've got talent, real talent. You should think about sharing that with more people." She smiled back, a little embarrassed but grateful. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It's just something I do for fun." But the host didn't seem to think it was just for fun. He looked at her with admiration and added, "You've got something special. Don't let that talent go unnoticed." His words stuck with her. For the first time, someone had seen her for more than just the waitress who served their drinks. Someone had noticed the passion she carried inside, the talent she had kept hidden for so long. The applause died down, but the effect it had on her remained. She couldn't explain it, but something had shifted inside her. She was no longer just someone in the background. For a few moments, she had been the star, and it felt good. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt a sense of excitement mixed with nervousness. What would come next? She didn't know. But she did know one thing. She had just taken the first step toward something bigger than she had ever imagined, and it felt like the beginning of something incredible. The applause was still ringing in her ears when she stepped away from the piano, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, but for a brief moment it didn't matter. She had done it. She had stepped into the spotlight, even if just for a few minutes. And for those moments, she had been someone else, a musician, a performer, someone whose talent wasn't hidden in the shadows anymore. The host, still smiling, clapped her on the back. "Incredible," he said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "You really should be playing more often." Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. I don't usually play in front of people," she said softly, still trying to catch her breath. "I can tell," he replied, grinning, "but you've got something special. Don't let that go to waste." Before she could respond, another guest, someone she hadn't even noticed during the performance, walked up to her. He was an older man, well-dressed, with a sharp, discerning look in his eyes. He offered her a polite but firm handshake. "That was beautiful," he said. "You've got real talent. Have you ever thought about playing at other events, maybe even professionally?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected anyone to say something like that. She had spent so many years hiding her talent, thinking of it as a personal hobby, something just for herself. The idea of playing for others, of making a living from it, was something she had never seriously considered. She shook her head, almost apologetically. "No, I haven't. I'm just a waitress here. Music's just something I do on the side." The man looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "A waitress?" he repeated, his tone both surprised and impressed. "Well, I can't tell you how many high-end events I've attended, and I've never heard anyone play like that." "You could have a real career in music if you wanted to." She didn't know what to say. His words were flattering, but they also felt almost too big for her. Music was just something she did in her free time, something that helped her forget about the stresses of her life. Could it really be something more? Could it be her future? The man didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he handed her a business card. "If you ever decide you want to take this further," he said, "call me. I run a talent agency, and I'd be more than happy to help you find some opportunities." She took the card, still feeling a little dazed. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded and gave her a small, encouraging smile before walking away to rejoin his group of friends. She stood there staring at the card in her hand, unsure of what to think. Was this some kind of joke? Or had she really just received an offer to pursue music professionally? The room had quieted down once again, and she could feel the weight of the moment starting to sink in. She had just played for a room full of influential people, and now they were all talking about her. There were whispers of admiration and surprise, people mentioning her performance to each other in hushed tones. She had become the topic of conversation, but not in the way she had ever expected. As the evening wore on, she tried to focus on her job. She served drinks, cleared plates, and took orders, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano, to the applause, to the business card in her pocket. What was she supposed to do with this? Was this just a one-time fluke, or was it something that could change the course of her life? She tried to shake off the thoughts, focusing instead on finishing her shift. But as the night went on, the excitement began to fade, replaced by a sense of doubt. What if this was all just a fantasy? What if the people who had praised her were just being polite? The more she thought about it, the more she began to doubt her own abilities. She wasn't a professional musician. She had never studied music seriously. She didn't even know the first thing about getting a job in the music industry. When the night finally came to an end, she headed home, the weight of the evening still on her shoulders. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the business card in her hand. Her fingers ran over the smooth surface, feeling the embossed letters. It seemed so official, so important. But was she ready to take that step? She glanced around the room at the life she had built for herself. It was simple, comfortable, She had a steady job. She had a roof over her head. But deep down, she knew that there was more she could do, more she was capable of. She had always known it, but until that night, she had never been brave enough to believe it. She tossed and turned in bed that night, her mind racing. The offer from the talent agent kept replaying in her head. Could she really make a career out of music? Was it possible? And if it was, what would that mean for her life? The next day, she found herself back at the restaurant. The shift was as busy as usual, but her thoughts were far from the tasks at hand. The offer from the night before loomed over her. She couldn't stop thinking about it. When the host came by to check on her, he seemed to notice the distracted look on her face. "Something on your mind?" he asked, leaning against the counter. She hesitated, unsure if she should share her thoughts. But there was something about the way he had supported her the night before that made her want to open up. So she took a deep breath and spoke. Someone asked me to consider playing professionally," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They even gave me a business card." The host raised an eyebrow. "What did you say?" I don't know," she admitted, feeling a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "I've never thought about it before. I've always just played for myself, but now it feels like maybe I could do more with it." The host smiled at her, his expression warm and understanding. "You absolutely could. You've got the talent. And more importantly, you've got the heart for it. You've already taken the first step by playing last night. Now it's about figuring out what you want to do with it." His words made something click inside her. She had already stepped into the spotlight, and while it had been terrifying, it had also been exhilarating. The applause, the admiration, it had all felt so real. Maybe she was ready for more. Maybe it was time to stop holding herself back. That night after her shift ended, she sat down at her piano. She hadn't played much since the event, too caught up in the whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. But tonight was different. She played with purpose, her fingers moving across the keys with more confidence than before. She played not for herself, not for escape, but for something bigger. For the future that might be waiting for her if she was brave enough to reach for it. Her performance at the restaurant had been just the beginning. Now it was up to her to decide what came next. Would she let this opportunity slip away, or would she take the leap? The music filled the room, and as her fingers danced across the keys, she made a decision. She was ready to stop being afraid, ready to take that next step, and no matter what came next, she was going to make it count. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. For a while, she couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing had been a dream. A part of her wanted to convince herself that it was just a fleeting moment, an unforgettable but brief spark that would soon fade. But as the days went on, that moment continued to haunt her. Every time she walked past the piano at the restaurant, she felt the pull, the temptation to sit down and play again. But it wasn't just the piano that haunted her. It was the question that lingered in her mind. Could she really make a career out of music? It was a question that kept her up at night, one that stirred deep within her as she worked her shifts. She had always enjoyed playing piano, but the thought of turning it into something more, something that could change her life, was terrifying. She had no formal training, no connections in the music world, and no idea how to navigate the path that could lead to something more than just playing in a dimly lit restaurant for a small crowd. But then again, wasn't she already taking steps? She had played for that crowd. They had clapped. They had noticed her. And more importantly, she had realized something about herself, that maybe she could do it. She wasn't just the girl behind the counter taking orders and serving drinks. She was more than that. She had a talent that was worth sharing. Still, as much as she wanted to believe in herself, doubts crept in every time she thought about taking the leap. What if she failed? What if the people who had praised her were just being polite? What if she wasn't good enough? One evening, a few days after the performance, she sat in her small apartment, the business card from the talent agent still tucked into the pocket of her jacket. She had looked at it countless times, weighing the decision in her mind. She could call the number, set up a meeting, and see where it led. Or she could keep the card as a reminder of what could have been and move on with her life. But something in her heart told her that she had to at least try. She didn't want to live with the regret of never knowing what might have been. She didn't want to look back years from now and wonder if she could have done more. With a deep breath, she pulled out the card and dialed the number. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Hello?"
Hi, this is...
"I'm calling about the business card I received the other night," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm the one who played the piano at the event." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and she held her breath, waiting. Then the voice on the other end replied, "Ah, yes, I remember you. How are you doing?" "I'm glad you called. What can I do for you?" For a moment, she was speechless. She hadn't expected him to remember her, let alone sound so eager to talk to her. It made her feel both nervous and encouraged at the same time. I've been thinking about what you said," she started. "About maybe playing professionally. I'm not sure what to do, but I'd like to know more. I'm interested in what opportunities might be out there." The man on the other end of the line sounded genuinely pleased. "I'm glad you reached out. Let's meet up and talk about it. I think you've got something special, and I'd love to help you explore it." They made arrangements to meet the next day. She hung up the phone, her hands trembling slightly as she processed what had just happened. She had taken the first step, but now came the hard part. She had to show him that she was more than just someone who could play a few songs on a piano. She had to convince him and herself that she could really do this. The next day, she showed up at the talent agency's office, her nerves almost getting the best of her. The building was sleek and modern, nothing like the small, quiet cafe where she had spent most of her life. The lobby was filled with people in suits talking on phones and running around handling business. She felt out of place in her simple clothes, but she took a deep breath and walked up to the receptionist. "I'm here to meet with Mr. Carson," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves. The receptionist nodded and pointed her to a nearby door. "He's expecting you. Right this way." She followed the receptionist down the hallway and into a sleek, glass-walled office. Mr. Carson, the talent agent, stood up when she entered, offering a handshake. He was well-dressed, his manner professional yet warm. "Hello, it's good to see you again," he said, motioning for her to take a seat. "I'm glad you decided to come in." "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, sitting down. "I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision, but here I am." Mr. Carson smiled, leaning forward. "You're making the right decision," he said confidently. "I've seen a lot of talent over the years, but there's something about your performance that stood out. It was raw, authentic, and that's exactly what people are looking for. I think you could go far." Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected to hear more about the challenges, the hard work it would take, but instead he was speaking to her like she was already a star. "So, what exactly does this entail?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. "How do I start?" He nodded, reaching for a folder on his desk. "It's a process," he said, opening the folder to reveal a few documents. "But I think you're ready for it. We'll start by getting you into a few smaller gigs. Nothing too big, just some local performances. I'll get you some exposure, connect you with the right people, and we'll see where it goes." She felt a rush of excitement mixed with nervousness. "And if it doesn't work out? What happens then?" Mr. Carson smiled again, his tone reassuring. "Don't worry about that yet. We're not going to rush things. It's all about building your brand, getting the right people to hear you. But if you keep putting in the effort, I'm confident you'll make it." For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. This was real. This wasn't just a fantasy. She was about to take a step towards something that had always felt out of reach, something that could change her life. They talked for another hour about logistics, about the music industry, and about what kind of performance opportunities could be a good starting point. Mr. Carson was encouraging, but he was also honest about the challenges that lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments where she'd feel like giving up. But if she kept pushing forward, if she kept working on her craft, she could make it. By the time the meeting was over, she felt like a different person. She was still the same waitress who had played piano for the first time in front of a crowd, but now she was someone who was about to take control of her future. She had an opportunity in front of her, one she couldn't let slip away. She walked out of the office, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of purpose. This was the beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. And as she walked back to her car, she couldn't help but smile. She had taken the first step, and there was no turning back now. The weeks following her meeting with Mr. Carson passed in a blur. Every day she felt both excited and anxious, as if she were standing on the edge of something big, something life-changing. The prospect of performing professionally seemed so far out of her reach just a few weeks ago. But now it was her reality. She had started playing at smaller venues, local cafes, charity events, and small private gatherings. The gigs weren't glamorous, but they were an important step. With each performance, she gained more confidence. The audience's reactions were encouraging, and each round of applause made her heart swell. She was no longer just the girl who served drinks. She was a musician, doing what she loved. But even with the small successes, there were moments of doubt. Performing in front of a small crowd was one thing, but she knew that the next step would be much bigger. Mr. Carson had mentioned the possibility of a bigger gig soon, something more public, something that could really make her name known, and that thought filled her with both excitement and terror. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of pressure, but deep down she knew there was no going back. She had come this far, and she couldn't let fear stop her now. One evening, after another successful but small performance at a local bar, she received a call from Mr. Carson. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw his name pop up on her phone. She had been expecting the call. He had mentioned a potential opportunity, but hearing from him still made her nervous. "Hello?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hey, how's it going?" Mr. Carson's voice was upbeat. "I've got some exciting news for you." Her pulse quickened. "What's going on?" "I've arranged for you to perform at a major event next month," he said, the words coming out fast but with a sense of purpose. "It's a high-profile charity gala. It's exactly the kind of event that could put you on the map." Her stomach dropped. She had known something like this was coming, but hearing it made it all so real. "A gala with that many people?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said, his voice reassuring. "It's a big opportunity, and I believe you're ready for it. You'll be performing alongside some well-known musicians, and there will be important people in the crowd. It's the kind of event that could really change things for you." She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big," she said. "What if I mess up?" Mr. Carson laughed lightly. "That's a normal reaction. Everyone feels that way before a big performance. But you've been doing great so far, and this is just the next step. I've seen your progress, and I know you can handle it. The key is to just keep doing what you've been doing. Play from the heart and let the music speak for itself." She wasn't sure if she believed him, but she knew there was no turning back now. She had spent so much time hiding her talent, keeping it to herself, and now she had to face the truth. She could either run from this opportunity or face her fear and take it head on. "Okay," she said, her voice firming up. "I'll do it. I'll prepare for the gala." "That's the spirit," Mr. Carson said. "I'll send over the details and we'll go over the set list soon. Just keep practicing and stay focused. You've got this." As she hung up the phone, her mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming performance. The gala would be held at one of the most exclusive venues in the city. She had seen pictures of the place before. An extravagant ballroom with sparkling chandeliers, lavish decor, and a crowd of well-dressed guests. The idea of performing there felt overwhelming, but there was also something thrilling about it. This was the kind of event she had always dreamed of. The next few weeks were filled with rehearsals and preparation. She spent hours at the piano, practicing the songs she would perform at the gala. Some were familiar pieces, songs she had played many times before, but she also worked on new pieces to add variety to her set. Every note, every chord felt important. She knew that this performance could change everything. The closer the date of the gala came, the more she felt the weight of the opportunity. She wasn't just preparing for a gig anymore. She was preparing for a chance to prove herself, to show the world who she was. The pressure was intense, but there was something inside her that refused to back down. The day of the event arrived, and she was a bundle of nerves. The gala was being held at an elegant hotel downtown, and she arrived early to make sure everything was set. The moment she stepped into the venue, she could feel the difference. The lavish setting, the luxurious atmosphere, it was all so different from the small venues she was used to. The ballroom was filled with long tables, adorned with expensive flowers, and the guests were already beginning to arrive in their elegant outfits. She walked to the piano, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. The piano looked just as beautiful as she remembered it from the pictures, but it felt so much bigger in person. She felt a rush of excitement and fear all at once. What if she wasn't good enough for this stage? What if the audience didn't like her performance? As she sat down on the bench, Mr. Carson walked over to her, his presence calming. "Remember," he said with a reassuring smile, "this is your moment. Just play from the heart like you always do. Don't think too much. You've got this." His words helped steady her nerves. She nodded, taking a deep breath. She had practiced endlessly. She had prepared herself as much as possible. Now it was time to let go and let the music take over. The lights dimmed and she could hear the chatter of the guests quieting down. The spotlight turned on, casting a warm glow over the piano. Her heart raced, but she didn't let it show. She sat up straight, placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. At first, the music was just a whisper in the vast room. But as she continued, the sound began to fill the space. The music took over, sweeping her up in its rhythm and melody. It was no longer just about the notes or the technicalities. It was about the emotion, the story she was telling with each song. She wasn't just performing for the guests. She was connecting with them, sharing a piece of herself in every chord. As the music swirled through the ballroom, she could feel the audience's attention shift. They were listening, really listening. The murmurs of conversation faded away, and all that remained was the sound of the piano. She had their full attention. She played through her set, the notes flowing effortlessly from her fingers. Each song felt like a conversation between her and the audience, a way to share her heart without speaking a word. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She wasn't even just the performer. She was the artist. When the last note rang out and the final song came to an end, there was a moment of silence before the crowd erupted into applause. The sound of clapping filled the room, and for a moment she couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had played at the gala, in front of a crowd of important people, and they had loved it. The applause was overwhelming, and she stood up from the piano, smiling through the rush of emotions. Mr. Carson was there, clapping along with the rest of the guests. He walked over to her, a proud look on his face. "You did it," he said, his voice full of pride. "That was amazing. You've just taken your career to the next level." She could hardly believe it. In that moment, she realized something. This was just the beginning. She had taken the leap, faced her fears, and it had paid off. The road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time, she truly believed that she was capable of achieving everything she had dreamed of. As she left the stage, the energy in the room was buzzing. She had gone from being a waitress to a star, and the journey was just beginning.